Hi everybody, my name is Anthony and I'm one of the studio librarians here at the Sachem Public Library. We're here today doing a quick video and an overview of our Garden of Lights, basically the equipment we use to make it happen and the process of actually making all of the lights dance to music. Before we get into some of the equipment we use for Garden of Lights, I'm going to give you a little background on the program itself. We actually started this program or event in December of 2018. The idea actually came from a community member, Jonathan Green, who is an engineer who works locally. He actually did a lot of research into how to make lights dance to music and brought that idea to the Sachem Public Library studio, where we've turned it into a full-fledged event with Jonathan still at the helm. One of the wonderful things about this event is that it involves library staff members, it involves community members, basically anyone in the community who wants to sign up and come out and help is welcome for this program. So we're lucky enough to have a lot of talented people who have lended a hand to do anything from artwork, to programming some of the lights, to setting up the electronics, to actually engineering some of the all the elements that the lights are actually hung to. Okay, so now that we talked about the history of Garden of Lights and the people that helped to work to make it all happen, we're going to go over some of the equipment that we use. So one of the first things to get installed every year is a Wi-Fi router, just like the ones you have in your house that take the signal coming into your house and make it wireless for all your devices to connect. That's the same device that we have out in the garden. So we have a whole bunch of small computers, Raspberry Pis, which we'll get into the details of that later, out there, and they help to coordinate all the lights. But to be able to coordinate all the lights, they all need to talk to each other, and the way they talk to each other is over a wireless network. So while our Wi-Fi router out in the garden is not connected to the internet, we're only really using it so all of the different computers and all the equipment that we use can talk to each other, make sure they're all in sync, and that everything is timed as perfectly as we can get it. Now, another benefit of using the Wi-Fi router to have all the devices connect to each other is that it's easy to control. So staff members and volunteers who are in charge of making sure the lights go on and that they're all working correctly can actually log into the router using their phones or any mobile device, and we can, if we're in distance of the garden, we can control the lights and what they do, which works out great for display testing before we actually go live with our show. And the next piece of equipment that we use in the Garden of Lights is our Raspberry Pis. These Raspberry Pis are the small computers that I mentioned earlier. These are basically the brains of the operation as far as the Garden of Lights equipment goes. These computers, tiny computers, are all set up with specialized software to run lighting and light shows. Now, what's so important about these Raspberry Pis is they actually serve as an intermediary between the actual programming and sequencing of the lights and the command boxes, which actually give the lights power and signal and tell them what to do, when to change color, what effects they should be doing, and at what times they should be doing it. So in essence, these Raspberry Pis are going to receive lighting instructions. Now, in this case, we have about 5 or 6 Raspberry Pis out in the garden, and they're all talking over the Wi-Fi router we mentioned earlier. Now, one Raspberry Pi is considered the master, and that master makes sure all the other Raspberry Pis are in sync. So it's making sure we're all at the same beat on the same song, and it making sure all of the programming to the lights match up perfectly with that beat and that song. So the next piece of equipment down the line are actual pixel light controllers. Now these pixel light controllers are actually microcontrollers that take the instructions from the Raspberry Pi, and those instructions are basically the programming of the lights and how they sync to the music. They take all that information and they actually command the individual lights what to do. So in this case, like we said before, to turn them off and on, to change the color, to time them to certain sequences, and things like that. So all of these strands of lights around the garden, not only do they need signal, they need power. So all these microcontrollers are handling everything. So they're giving all of our light strands 12 volts of power, or at the same time sending that signal down the line. Now, these microcontrollers, and I'll include a picture up here, usually have between 4 and 16 ports on them. And these ports are just areas where you can plug the different light strands into. And the reason why I mention these ports is because it comes into play when we're actually planning the overall all the structures, all the elements, how many lights are going to be out in the garden, how many lights are on each individual object, all has to be planned out ahead of time. So each port on these controllers can only support so much power before it draws too much, and then it has a negative effect on the lights and has a negative effect on the controllers. So in this case, let's say for instance our megatree, which is a 32 strand tree that stands over 10 feet tall, that pulls a lot of power. So that whole tree is basically what a maximum of one box can support. And if we were to connect anything else to it, we may start to have problems. So knowing ahead of time that this box has to be dedicated to this tree helps us figure out how we're going to support other objects and elements around the garden that we want to light up. Now, having said that, as far as power with the boxes, we actually use about 6 control boxes, which are actually all connected to the Raspberry Pi. Luckily enough, the Raspberry Pis are small enough that they can fit in the enclosures where the XLite controllers are kept. So it actually goes into one tiny package. So if you see any little gray boxes around the garden, that's where all basically the brains behind the garden is, and that's where all of our power is running from to all the different light strands. Now we've talked about the brains of the operation as far as equipment goes. We'll talk about the workhorses of the show, which are lights, which is what everyone comes to see. So the specific type of lights we use are actually called pixel lights. Now we use 2 different styles. There's something called a pixel node light, which has a little bit of a more similar shape to a normal mini light you'd see around the holidays. And we also use a pixel LED strip, which is basically a long, about 16-foot roll of LED lighting. Now the great and very cool thing about these LED strips is that it's actually a mixture of 3 little LEDs, a red LED, a green LED, and a blue LED. Now, when they're all mixed together, they make whatever color you want to. So each pixel LED has these 3 tiny LEDs in there that are told how to mix to make whichever color we want at which specific time. So what this means is you have incredible control over the lights and what you want them to do. So imagine you had a normal light strand, and you could control each of those lights, whatever you wanted to do, individually of each other. So normally you plug it in, they all go one color, they all blink together, or there's a pre-programmed sequence. We don't have any of that. So we have a blank canvas that we can make those lights basically do whatever we want. And that goes for the kind of the pixel node light I mentioned and the pixel strip. They both get programmed the same way. It's just they look a little bit different and are implemented a little bit differently depending on what kind of decoration we're trying to make. Now there is another type of light that we use, and that is a LED floodlight. Now these floodlights are just like our other lights, and they're kind of considered smart lights, so we can program them. So they're each 10-watt floodlights, but they can be programmed to do whatever effect we want them to do. So say we want to give it a fire flicker effect on an area, or lighting up a building or a small figure or anything like that, we can do that. If we just want to switch the color or have colors pulse, we can do that too. So we have the same freedom of control and programming of the lights, but in this case it's in a floodlight form, so it actually throws out quite a bit of light. So we've talked a little bit about the control and the electronics behind Garden of Lights, and we've also talked about the lights themselves. So what actually ties all that together is a piece of software called XLite. And what XLite allows us to do is to program and sequence our lights to whatever music we choose. So one of the great things about XLite is it actually allows us to kind of set up and enter in all the different control boxes we have, all the different lights we have, and what lights are connected to what ports. We can set that all up in XLites, and then we can go in and we can add all of our models and actually see 3D representations on the screen of what all our effects and lighting should look like. So, and when I say models, I mean things like, so in the case of a megatree, you have to set up the megatree in XLites, tell it how many strands of light you have, what shape, where the lights start. You also have things like low arches you can add, like the ones that are low to the ground. You can have lights dance along those. You can set up high arch models where those are basically the arches you walk under. There you have a lot of freedom in what you can actually set up as far as them physical models, and just having that representation there to hit play and see what you're doing while you're programming it is awesome. So once you have all your control boxes and all the ports and all of the different models set up, now it's time to start some sequencing. So you can actually load a song into XLites, and then all of your models will show up, and then also a whole bunch of pre-made effects, and also the tools to kind of make your own custom effects. Now you can go as simple or as crazy as you want to go with XLites. So if you want things going and happening to each beat, you could have that going. You can change it up, or you could have like a nice gentle effect going through your song. It is completely up to you how you want to set it up. We're very lucky on our Garden of Lights team. We happen to have a software engineer who likes doing the programming and is really good at it, so he makes quick work of making some awesome effects. So now we've talked about the electronics control, we've talked about the lights, and we've talked about the programming. I just want to take a step back and go over an overview of how everything works together. So in this case, we have that Wi-Fi router. Now all those Raspberry Pis are connected to that Wi-Fi router. That way they can talk to each other and make sure they're all in sync when the show is running, and it makes sure everyone's working. It also gives the Garden of Lights team control over all those Raspberry Pis from one point. If you log into the Wi-Fi router, you can connect to all the Raspberry Pis. Now on each Raspberry Pi is the sequencing and light programming information that we created in XLites. So each Raspberry Pi has its program loaded, and then that program, all the instructions from that program are forwarded along to the control boxes from the Raspberry Pis. And from those control boxes, now sends out the signal to all of the lights. So you have to have all of those things working together and talking to each other successfully to have a fully functioning light show. That about wraps up our quick overview of the equipment, lighting, and programming that make Garden of Lights happen. I hope you guys will be able to join us this year for our third year, our 2020 Garden of Lights. I believe we start on December 7th. For more information on the running dates and how to register for the program, you can check out the Sachem Public Library's website and our December newsletter. I want to thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at the studio@sachemlibrary.org via email, or you can give us a call at 631-588-5024, extension 230, to get in contact with the studio.